Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much to those of you who made the effort to come out. To those of you staying at home watching TV, I love you, but you're not helping. I want to start with a quote. Again, thank you so much to all of our speakers. I so appreciate you coming tonight. Could you show appreciation to every one of them again? Pope John Paul II. As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. John Wesley. The history of mankind, the history of salvation, passes by way of the family. My mother was the source from whom I gained the guiding principles of my life. And again, I learned more Christianity from my mother than from all the theologians in England. Family is a sacred, God-ordained institution. Family is everything. The 1916 proclamation of the Irish Republic resolved to cherish all the children of the nation equally. And surely part of cherishing children is protecting children. In particular, protecting their innocence and emerging identity from those who would sow confusion and perversion in their hearts. Don't use that word, Pastor. You will alienate people. Sorry, but teaching little kids about masturbation and anal sex isn't appropriate, it's perverted, and I'm not going to apologize. The UN and the WEF are utterly wrong when they say that kids are sexual beings. And it's interesting, if you look into some of their writings on these issues, it's absolutely shocking. And it seems clear there's a demonic agenda to sexualize children in the name of education. I disagree with the Taoiseach. Some of the books being put in place in libraries are not just simply inappropriate, they're perverted. And no child should be exposed to them. I know Senator Sharon read some of them in the Senate. But as parents, you have a God-given instinct to protect your kids from dangerous people and dangerous ideas, because there are some subjects that kids are not yet ready to hear. And I want to read a quote here by Corrie ten Boom. She was a Dutch Christian who, along with her family, were imprisoned in Ravensbrück concentration camp because they had helped many Jewish families escape the Nazis. And hear this quote. She said, "And so seated next to my father in the train compartment, I suddenly asked, 'Father, what is sex in?' He turned to look at me, as he always did when answering a question, but to my surprise said nothing. At last he stood up, lifted his traveling case off the floor and set it on the floor. And set this heavy case on the floor. 'Will you carry it off the train, Corrie?' he asked. I stood up and tugged at it. It was crammed with the watches and spare parts he had purchased that morning, for he was a watchmaker. 'It's too heavy,' I said. 'Yes,' he said, 'and I would be a pretty poor father who would ask his little child to carry such a load.' It's the same way, Corrie, with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you are older and stronger, you can bear it. For now, you must trust me to carry it for you.' And in the same way, it's clear that kids develop at different stages and degrees. There is no one-size-fits-all regarding a child's development. You see, nobody knows their children better than their parents. And, you know, Article 42(1) from the Constitution says, the state acknowledges that the primary and natural educator of the child is the family, and guarantees to respect the inalienable rights and duty of parents to provide, according to their means, for the religious and moral, intellectual, physical, and social education of their children. And 2, parents shall be free to provide this education in their homes or private schools or schools recognized or established by the state. You see, family is everything, and education is a key part, a key aspect to the preservation and prosperity of family. SPHE at its core is anti-family, for it presents family as simply just another community among others. But the founders of the Irish state believed in family, and thus it was acknowledged in our founding documents, because it was implicitly understood by them that family, and by extension parenthood, was worth protecting and had to be protected if our society was to have any future. And thus, these recent changes to the education system, in a way, are a logical outworking of the nihilistic, anti-family, anti-gender, and ultimately anti-human view that many of our world leaders have embraced. And this explains the relentless push of climate change, this idea that the world is in danger, ironically, because of the prevalence of human life, which is viewed as a form of pollution and a real and present danger and threat to the planet. And thus, you must not only control consumption, you ultimately have to control and reduce the population. And thus, abortion, euthanasia, and trans indoctrination of impressionable children all work hand in glove to deface, devalue, and ultimately destroy human life made in God's image. You see, Imago Dei is Latin for image of God. And let me say this social engineering has to stop, because incidentally, many of our leaders are childless, including our Taoiseach, Minister for Education, and Minister for Children, along with many global leaders. And this isn't an accusation, it's simply an observation. And thus, they don't always understand what is at stake, because parenthood changes us radically. Many of us saw the world very differently before we had children. I'm reminded of that funny scene from Paddington Bear where, the father drives up with his pregnant wife on a motorbike, and he's got, long hair, and he's dressed like a hippie. And a couple of days later, he comes back to collect the child, and he's dressed like an older man. He's driving a beige Volvo. And it was just that realization that, becoming fathers changes us. And again, you maybe say, Pastor, are you daring to say that someone shouldn't be Minister for Education or Minister for Children unless they have kids themselves? Yes. Why should you? Why should you be entrusted with making policies that affect kids and you don't have any? If you're not a father or mother, you cannot understand the sacred bond that you have with your child. Because if Genesis 1:27, God made them male and female, gives us the archetype, our blueprint for gender, Genesis 2:20-25 gives us the blueprint for family. This reason, a man shall leave his father and mother. This is the very, very beginning of the Bible, and it says, be joined to his wife, they two shall become one flesh. And so, but this is the problem. As a society, we have redefined marriage and family, and now we want to redefine sex and gender. They redefine because they want to undermine. Because family is the last defense against these anti-God, anti-human policies. Because the social engineering project will not be finished until everything that God has given to man has been literally destroyed beyond recognition. Imago Dei, the image of God in man, is reflected in our gender, male and female, as defined by God, and this culminates in marriage, and hopefully afterwards with children. And we see this sense of completion, two halves being miraculously joined together by God, different but equal. Different by divine design, equal in value, but different in ability. A woman can't father a child, and a man can't get pregnant. I mean, these shouldn't be controversial statements. And our reluctance to say this openly is an indication of just how deluded and disconnected from reality we have become. Because our societies deliberate and obsessive efforts to eliminate words like father and mother, and instead use parent 1 and 2 on our official documents, and thereby pretending that any two random people can somehow create life. They can't. You need a male, you need a female. Or replacing, woman with people who menstruate, replacing breastfeeding with chest feeding, and teachers being advised to stop using archaic terms like boys and girls and giving their pronouns. I believe that's a warning to us, because all of this is a statement of intent. The war on words and the redefinition of age-old meaning is a declaration that they intend to destroy not just the word or the meaning, but the very concept of itself, whether of gender, sex, morality, and by extension, the family unit. So don't be naive. They're deliberately undermining parental authority and the very family itself by teaching these radical and unbiological ideas of sexuality. And let me say this, I find it hard to respect religious leaders who know better, because we've been given the manual that clearly identifies the God-given distinctions that exist between the sexes. And let me say this again, I have friends that I've known for 15, 20 years in ministry. They're not here, they weren't here the last time, and they believe what I believe, but they are hiding and they refuse. The problem they have is because I say openly what they believe in private. If you're a pastor, if you're a priest, if you're a bishop, if you're an imam, this is a time to stand up and be counted. Ask your pastor, were you here? And if not, why not? What were you doing? Watching Coronation Street? Sorry, I'm not good at political correctness. I burned a lot of bridges, but sometimes bridges need to be burned. Sometimes things need to be said. Sometimes a line has to be drawn. This is not a day to be a spineless coward. We're different by design. And for those men and women who remain silent in the face of the war on family, gender, kids, and life itself, let me simply quote the British writer C.S. Lewis, who said, "One of the most cowardly things ordinary people do is to shut their eyes to facts. Facts are stubborn things. They don't change. Even when we change the meaning of words, or when we just choose to look the other way and pretend we did not see. I can pretend that gravity doesn't exist, but if I jump off the roof of this building in a Superman costume, guess what will happen? Even if I'm delusional, my delusion does not change reality. I may be hurt or even killed. And in the same way, children who are taught this delusional ideology will suffer harm, because biological fact cannot be erased by drugs, medical procedures, or state-sponsored propaganda. Feelings cannot erase or override facts. And the fact is, sex is binary and gender is unchangeable. And yet, tragically, for the kids who've been brainwashed by our education system, it will be too late if they have been sterilized and mutilated, because there is no coming back. And the fact is this, children are being indoctrinated in Irish schools with information that is not biologically correct, rational, nor safe. And the relentless and obsessive pushing of LGBT material in our schools is not respectful, nor is it inclusive to people of faith. And if that offends you, be offended. Because for far too long, Christian kids have felt like they have been under assault and intimidated, and we have been silent. And I'm sure there are many Muslim and Jewish kids who feel the exact same way. It's time to be frank. Live your life, but leave our kids alone. Because whether you can see it or not, the trans movement is simply the logical progression of LGB. And to act like it isn't is utterly disingenuous. This is how we got here. We've exalted rights over responsibilities, self-indulgence over self-restraint, rebellion over submission, lies over truth, and man over God. And then we wonder why we're in the mess that we are in. You know, The Sound of Freedom was in Irish cinemas recently, a powerful movie exposing the evils of child trafficking. You know, the movie in essence is about predators who seek to sexualize, use, and abuse children. Don't go there, Pastor. Don't use the P word. Listen, I'm not worried if I offend predators. Okay, because I've no problem. Live as you want. But if your goal is to speak to little children about sex and dance before them, dressed like a stripper, I'm sorry, you're a predator. Why not go into the prisons and dance for them? Why not go into old folks' homes? See how that goes. One of the most cowardly things ordinary people do is to shut their eyes to facts. You see, many of my friends say I'm just called to preach the gospel. I'm not called to confront worldly governments. And so you sit back and allow kids to be confused, sexualized, and taken on a pathway to hell. Do you think as a religious leader that you have a duty of care to protect children? Do you think Jesus would have been silent? Was he silent when they were buying and selling in the temple? Surely, as his followers, he wants us to do more than simply pray and hope for the best. I mean, did Martin Luther King do that? Did William Wilberforce do that? No. They did more than that. They recognized that we don't, exist in a little bubble. We have to understand, we have a responsibility to our society to make it a better place. And, Jesus had very strong opinions about those who hurt kids. Matthew 18:6, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. Do you think that teaching little kids, 5 and 10-year-old kids about anal sex and about oral sex and about all of these, sexual things, do you think that might harm them? Do you think it might put them on a pathway maybe that they might never have been on? Let me say this, as a probably an 8-year-old boy, I was an avid reader. I remember in my grandmother's house, there was a little storybook I read. And in this storybook, it was just an adventure about this boy, and it was a really interesting story. I was enthralled. But, towards the end of the story, somebody wrote that with a very deviant mind, because at the end, the boy a spell was broken and he turned into this beautiful little girl. And you know what? That just one book sowed confusion in my heart for probably 3 or 4 years, where I started wondering, maybe was I meant to be that way as well? Because kids are impressionable. They're open to suggestion. That was always understood by parents. There's, I think it was G.K. Chesterton once said, don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. I think that pretty much describes our generation. And so, anyway, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he said this: the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to its children. I have a profound sense of gratitude to these men who laid their lives down in World War II to purchase a freedom that they would never enjoy themselves. A freedom that I enjoyed. And amazingly, long before I was born, they were fighting for me. Many of these men, Canadian, American, British, Polish, French, etc. Some of them 18, 19, 20 years of age, giving their lives so that we could enjoy freedom. Well, I believe it's time for us to pay it forward to the next generation. And that's why we have to stand. We have to stand. There's a time to be silent. There's a time to speak. And I say that to all of my colleagues in ministry. Guys, it's time to grow up here and either step forward or step aside. If we remain silent, particularly as religious leaders, we are doing our kids, our congregation, and our society a disservice. You might say, well, what about showing compassion to kids that are confused? Well, putting those poor kids on puberty blockers, mutilating and sterilizing them is not compassion. You see, we have redefined the family and thus rejected God's order. You know, the Barbie movie is a perfect example of the cynical social engineering that is happening right under our noses. Are you aware of the messaging they've been putting into children's entertainment for some years now? You see, the idea of family is forever has been replaced by the mantra, inclusion is everything. And so we see cartoons like Disney Muppet Babies with gonzo cross-dressing, or books like Pink is for Boys by Rob Perlman, described in one review as this celebration of the colors of the rainbow, featuring a diverse cast of characters, encourages kids to reject rigid gender norms and to follow their passions. It's for ages 4 to 8. You know, to reject rigid gender norms. I mean, what kid even understands what they're even saying there? As people of faith, we believe in truth that is not determined by culture, courts, social media, but by God. Transcendent truth. You might say, but Pastor, Barbie's just a bit of harmless fun. Don't be such a dummy. It's brainwashing, it's propaganda. 2 Corinthians 11, it says, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It's no surprise then if his servants masquerade as angels of righteousness. You see, evil masquerades as good, darkness masquerades as light, lies masquerade as truth, and indoctrination masquerades as education. You know, the Bible spoke about times like this. It says, justice is turned back and righteousness stands afar off, for truth is fallen in the streets. And this is the reality. We have activists masquerading as politicians, teachers, and journalists. And so too, we have lies and propaganda masquerading as education and entertainment. And thus, we have woke world, where literally everything, and I mean everything, is a lesson. Barbie's just another piece of woke poison being fed to our kids. You know, all of us like a little nostalgia, and many mothers may enjoy it in the level of reliving their childhood, but not realize it's just another anti-man, anti-mother, anti-family diatribe being planted in the hearts of little kids. You see, this agenda isn't just to erase women. It is about erasing mothers, fathers, and in particular, family. You see, a girl or a boy who goes down the trans rabbit hole ends up being sterilized. And ultimately, I believe this is the end goal of those who are promoting this agenda of less useless eaters. Or as the Greens or Stop Oil cult members might say, less people, less pollution. Eamon Ryan is free to use that for his next election. Less people, less pollution. Forget about the euphemisms about concern, compassion, or inclusion. They are lies. We are being lied to all the time. Abortion isn't about health care. It is the brutal murder of an innocent life. In the same way, trans ideology is neither compassionate, progressive, nor inclusive. It might be dressed up in the language of compassion, but in reality it's divisive, destructive, dangerous, and utterly unscientific, and it has to be removed from our schools. And let me say this. If you've never heard a minister or a priest or a religious leader talking like this, you're going to the wrong church. Because if your pastor, priest, or bishop isn't addressing these issues and taking a public stand, and in particular a stand on behalf of the war on the family, they're either asleep or they're cowards. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just being honest. Because I've had it up to here with people giving me their little excuses. Oh, I have to be here, I have to be there, I have to do the other thing. No, this is about our children. This is about our children. I'll come if I find time. No, you don't find time. You make time for what is important. This is important. Martin Luther King spoke to the conscience of a nation. That was his job, and it ultimately cost him his life. But he was faithful to speak truth to power and proclaimed truth, and he helped to shape his nation for the better. And so our silence as ministers on the trans issue has not helped. As religious leaders, we have a duty of care to our children. Ask your pastor or priest why they're not speaking on this issue. There's a time for us to, like I said, to count the cost and realize there may be a price to pay for standing up for truth, but let's ensure that we pay it and not our children or our children's children, who might not even actually exist if they end up being brainwashed and consequently confused and subsequently sterilized. You see, there are some, I believe, for whom ministry is a career, not a calling, and thus they are able to remain silent to avoid being attacked or losing members. Well, pastor, maybe they're speaking quietly in the background to avoid confrontation or public embarrassment to the government. Well, let me say this, it's not working. They implemented this. It's in our schools. Okay, they've shown us as people of faith no respect. And again, to our Muslim friends, you are welcome. I'm so appreciate you coming here. Thank you. Our government have sent kids to Tavistock Clinic in the UK. Kids have been prescribed life-altering puberty blockers, and this curriculum or program is endorsing and fast-tracking this toxic gender ideology in our schools. I appreciate Irish government are hoping that we will give up and go away, but they need to realize something. We are not giving up on our children or the children of this nation to a destructive, unscientific policy that will not only cause confusion, but violate the innocence of children and sexualize them long before any such natural inclination would exist. And now, I appreciate to some of the blue-haired, childless, vegan, cat-keeping activists and ideologues behind these policies, these changes might make perfect sense. But to us who are parents and have a vested interest in protecting the innocence of our children, this is not acceptable, and we will not go away. We are the parents of our children, not the state. And I will keep repeating that word, parents and family, because it's like garlic and a cross to the vampirish tendencies of those who wish to indoctrinate, sexualize, and ultimately confuse our children in the name of progress. I said it the last time, but again, if an adult feels the need to talk to kids about sex, then they're the problem, they're the bad guy. Get the hell away from our kids. Just give me 2 or 3 minutes and I'll finish. The US President Joe Biden is wrong. Children are not the property of the state. Last April, he asserted, our nation's children are all our children. No, they are not. Children are neither produced by nor the property of governments, NGOs, or global corporations, and governments need to stop this relentless and obsessive undermining of the family unit. Family is forever. And any state that does not protect the family is destined to fail. Family is everything. They are our children. They do not belong to politicians, teachers, or activists. And as people of faith, or simply people of common sense, we need to realize and openly state that gender ideology is destructive, divisive, and ultimately a Trojan horse to facilitate the weaponization of our education system against faith, family, and the age-old understanding of our God-given distinctions between male and female. And so, again, as I finish, I just want to acknowledge this. 2 Kings gives a story of King Hezekiah. And it says he was sick and he cried out to God and God gave him an extra 15 years. However, the kings of Babylon came. He showed them the temple. He showed them all everything. And the prophet came and rebuked him. And he said something quite profound. He said, he rebuked him for doing this. And it's 2 Kings chapter 20, and I just think it's very relevant to the times that we are in. Jesus said this, count the cost. And he said, behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they will be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. And so Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of the Lord which you've spoken is good, for he said, will there not be peace and truth, at least in my days? Like this king, it's easy for us to be selfish, narcissistic, and lazy. this place could have been filled tonight. Except that people are selfish, narcissistic, and ultimately lazy. And so we choose the easy way. And we avoid the battles that our kids will one day have to fight. Hezekiah chose the quiet life. He gave up on the next generation. I mean, when he was sick, he cried out for his own life, but he wasn't burdened or concerned about the generations that were to come. Are you? Are you concerned about the Ireland that we will see in 10, 20, 30 years' time? When grown adults are afraid to give their opinion about what they think. And this hasn't happened overnight. I mean, we've seen it now with quite a few years, whether it was the same-sex marriage referendum or abortion or any of these issues where now there's only one right opinion, and if you don't buy into it, then you are excluded from polite society and you're treated like you're some kind of pariah. The reason why I'm dangerous is because I no longer care what people say or think or do. I'm speaking up because I have a burden for the children of this nation. We're going to go into Q&A in a moment, and it's on the screen there. You can start putting in your questions. But I'm speaking up because I have a burden for the children of this nation who will suffer once again because of cowardice and state ineptitude. Because we are seeing a creeping erosion of our rights and freedoms as parents and people of faith. Ironically, in the name of giving rights and freedoms to others. But a child's right to his or her God-given identity and innocence, and the right to an education free from Marxist indoctrination and the teaching of unscientific nonsense. You know, a woman's right to privacy, i.e. toilets and changing rooms, these are non-negotiables. Healthy societies have always had healthy boundaries, and our inability or unwillingness to fight for them is a disturbing indication of our cowardice, our apathy, and our stupidity. I've come to the conclusion this is one of the defining issues of our age, and that's why I've put everything on the altar with regards to this. I'm going to let the chips fall where they may, but I knew I needed to take this stand tonight and say what needed to be said. This is our World War II moment. I'm not being melodramatic, but again, this is about the indoctrination of our children. And again, you need to ask your minister, priest, bishop, imam, whatever, what do you believe regarding gender ideology? And if you don't support it, what are you doing to stop it? Because it is affecting my children. I know I've spoken freely tonight, and probably some of you are in shock. But why am I considered radical for speaking openly like I live in a free country? I mean, we do live in a democracy, I assume still. You see, this toxic trans ideology is utterly wrong, and our government have not only to rescind these changes, they have to stop pushing this entire ideology in our schools. Let me say this, they did not consult us as parents when they brought this in. They might have had some sort of a side group somewhere, but they did not consult parents. They did not have our permission, and they did not have authority to push this ideology. The government of Ireland is guilty of reckless endangerment, and so tonight I want to finish by mentioning 3 simple issues regarding the Minister for Education. 1, she promoted an ideology in place of fact-based education. 2, she promoted an ideology that is dangerous to the very children placed under her care, especially given that other countries are raising concerns about the promotion of gender ideology among children. And 3, she persistently has refused to engage with us as church leaders and seems determined to follow on a path that is at odds with the deeply held beliefs of many, and it is beliefs that are, pushing an agenda that is against God's word, and has decided to press on regardless of the concerns that have been raised. And let me say this, any teaching that cannot be questioned is a danger to society. And so, in light of this, we're publicly calling on the Minister of Education to resign. Do the honorable thing and resign. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. In March, we wrote a letter to the government. It was signed by 250 church leaders, both north and south, representing tens of thousands of parents, requesting to meet with the minister to discuss our concerns, and to date, they have refused. And so it would appear that the government is actively working against us to, and let me say this, I believe they need to be replaced with an alternative, family-friendly government. Because I apologize for speaking so long, but let me say this. The government and RTE have been working hand in glove for a number of years now, and both of them have this in common. Neither is fit for purpose and need to be replaced.